Welcome, everybody, to the Exam Security Summit in Center Edition. My name is Steve Kazin, and I'm going to be your moderator today. Everyone's really talking about remote proctoring and AI assisted cheating, like the physical test center is the safe, solved alternative. It really isn't. It's just a different threat surface, and in some ways, a more mature one, because bad actors have had decades to work out how to beat it. Today, we're going to go inside the walls of the testing center, smuggled devices, proxy candidates, insider collusion, and content leaks. With two people who've seen this from opposite vantage points, program oversight and independent field analysis. I'm joined today by Charles Scott, online student service manager at Illinois Tech, and Michael Goodine, independent analyst covering English language assessments. Charles, Michael, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start at a really high level. Um, and we'll start with Charles. From where you sit overseeing test security at scale, what's changed most about in-center threats over the last few years?
Well, a little background. I have a very small testing center, small subset of our population that we serve here. And honestly, we do a very one-on-one kind of oversight. If at most it would maybe be three, one proctor to three students. So really, we have a very close observation of these students. So typically they don't really attempt anything like that. I think what we've seen is, with the smartwatches and glasses and things like that. I don't think we've ever had a case with the glasses, but smartwatches occasionally, or a second phone where someone will um, attempt to bring in another device. We always collect their phone and other electronic devices at the beginning if those aren't allowed. And then sometimes they may have a dummy phone they hand off to you and then try to do something. Very rare in our case.
Got it. Awesome. Michael, same question to you.
Well, my beat is actually English language testing, and what I've noticed in recent years is that there's been two kind of streams um, emerging as in the comparison of high stakes versus lower stakes tests. So the big high stakes in tests have really all digitized in recent years. They're all being delivered digitally now, which I think has eliminated some long-standing threats, or if not eliminated them, it greatly reduced them. So I'm thinking of things like question theft, which is not as much of an issue since the items are being delivered to the test center just moments before the test begins. And then things like hidden earpieces being used within the test center because the people at different computers have different versions of the test. So that kind of communication isn't such an issue. So I think that dishonest players are maybe flooding into a smaller range of cheating methods. But on the other hand, a lot of the lower stakes English tests are still done entirely on paper, much in
Right.
the same way they were done in the 1980s, even. And those
Right.
tests appear to remain vulnerable still to a much wider range of threats. So, like time zone shenanigans come into play still. Item theft is still an issue if test papers are being delivered in boxes to the test center the night before. And even like staff collusion and the hidden earpieces remain a problem for those tests. So it's really sort of a convergence or a divergence, I should say, of these two different types of English tests.
Got it. Got it. That volume versus novelty tension is really a good place to start here because it shows up immediately in the first threat category, devices. Um, as centers have become much more modernized over the last few years, better scanning, better layouts, better staff training, has device smuggling actually declined, or is it just getting really harder to spot? And let me direct this to Michael first.
Well, a big part of my work is actually taking the tests. So 9 or 10 times a year, I'll actually register for a test as a regular student or test taker would. I'll go down to the test center and I'll experience it firsthand. And it does seem that in recent years, staff training has really come a long way. staff are more aware of devices, and it just seems they're doing a much more thorough job of checking for them. 3 or 4 years ago, they might have glanced very quickly at my glasses. They're like, "Well, those are pretty normal glasses.
Right.
No problem. Go on through." But now, certainly, I remove the glasses. I'll hand them to a staff member on a little tray, and they'll scan them with some kind of device and also eyeball them. And they're also, giving me a bit more of a thorough check with the metal detector. They're maybe glancing at my ears in a way that they didn't before. So it does seem that this has probably reduced the use of hidden devices, I would hope. However, the test providers don't really give us statistics on this, so it's hard to
Right.
say definitively.
Yeah, that makes sense. Charles, what do you think about that?
I think that our students, I haven't seen any evolution of them. Like I said, it's a small volume, so I haven't really seen an evolution of them attempting to bring in other devices, or over the years seen them. We're just aware of the devices that can be used and ask about them, check for them. But really, there hasn't been any more instance of catching or removing, taking away devices from students that are entering to take the test. I haven't seen an increase over the time.
Got it. Just from a follow-up perspective, does the content itself ever get restructured because the device risk is assumed rather than solved? I'll
I
ask
mean,
Beth you that question.
So
sorry,
go ahead,
Charles, go
Mike.
ahead if you like. Um, in terms of content, I mean, probably not very quickly. But one of the things we have seen with at-home testing is that question design has changed somewhat, and it appears to be in response to cheating methods. So, for example, it's a lot easier to cheat on a multiple choice question, right, than it is a question where you have to highlight some text or move some text around with your mouse, like on the interface, because clearly, you can just cheating's easier when the answer is just A, B, or C. So it would be interesting to see if this comes to affect test center tests. It doesn't seem to have affected them so far. Like the designers of the tests aren't really changing them for that reason, but it is something that probably could emerge in the not too distant future.
Got it. Charles, you were going to say
Uh,
something?
yeah, I think that we've seen, there are methods you can use within your LMS when you build the exams to, stagger the answers, stagger the questions, make the multiple choices in different orders for each question, and give them a time limit where, and these are instructors who are, there may not be enough time to complete the exam, so it cuts down on a student's, and I've had instructors tell me, if I structure it this way, they really don't have the time. If they're taking time to try to get around this or communicate with somebody or something like that, it's going to take up more of their time than if they just do the exam. They're going to be hurting themselves in the long run. Um, and then also on a bigger scale, I think a lot of instructors have opened up to the fact that I'm going to allow certain devices to be used, just because there's an assumption that you can't keep that great of control over it. So they're allowing certain things and then working within those parameters. Like I've even had instructors let them use AI, full AI. I don't know what they're doing on their end when they're grading those, but I've also read about you follow up on the exam. You ask specific questions about the answers that they gave. So if they're using AI, they better have a pretty good idea or at least familiarize themselves with the answers that they gave, because they may just spot check them with a quick, oral exam or something like that, or ask them to elaborate on that answer and how they came about that answer, as a take home thing or even an in-class thing or something like that. So
Right, right. Exactly. You mentioned smartwatches, earpieces, smart glasses. Are detection protocols keeping up with how fast the hardware category is evolving, Charles?
as far as I know, yes. Like I said, at a massive testing center, I'm not sure how they're looking at these things. But from our perspective, Yes, I don't think that there's anything that we can't detect, especially with observation after we've kind of gone through it. If they
Yeah.
try to sneak something in, they're going to have to remove that device or use that device in front of a proctor, or even in some cases, if we're using an online proctor, it's going to be seen, and it's a little bit easier when you're
Yeah.
in an online exam when you have just uh, a webcam or a side camera or something like that. It's a little easier, but even those protocols are caught. There are protocols in place where the problem is once they're addressed, do they continue to try and use it?
Yeah.
Because some students are very aggressive about it. We do not, in an in-house situation here, we don't see that. We do occasionally will proctor a larger group of people in a classroom, and honestly, I always say that that's a bigger threat than even if the instructor's proctoring the exam in the classroom. That can at times be a bigger threat because he's looking at 25 students
Right.
that are trying to, move under the desk or around, or, so really, the instructor in the classroom has a bigger probably threat presence than we do here in our little in-house testing center.
Got it. Michael, same question. Is the category really evolving, the hardware category that you see?
Probably, yes. I mean, it is evolving.
Yeah.
It is keeping up. I like how Charles mentioned the idea of massive test centers. The last English test I took was a few months ago. 200 candidates did it simultaneously, and they had 3 separate sittings each day. That presents challenges just based
Yeah.
on the number of people coming in. But as I did say a moment ago, it does seem that staff training is evolving and they are keeping up with the threats. Now, it does raise questions of what about the future as the technology evolves, as it gets smaller and as it gets harder to spot? What um, what should test centers be expected to do? Technology can be used to supplement the human expertise, but it does raise questions about privacy, about what kind of
Right.
things we might be subjecting honest students to in the name of security. And that's something we could discuss if you wish, but it does. The future is somewhat unclear to me.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Going to the next segment, devices really get a lot of the headlines nowadays, but a lot of the practitioners tell us the bigger blind spot is actually who's sitting in the chair in the first place. Identity verification at check-in sounds solved on paper, ID scan, photo match, signature. Where does it still break down in practice? Charles, I'll start with you.
Um, Actually, here, the biggest, and this is gonna sound kind of fun. I mean, I suppose that if we're checking a state ID, or sometimes a student ID here, students can change a lot from their freshman year until their senior year.
Yes. Yeah.
So sometimes when you're looking at a photo ID, we'll have to ask for a second ID just because, it's impossible to really tell, between different hairstyles, different looks, or gained weight, lost weight. My personal ID here at the university is probably 20 years old, so I look quite different in my picture.
Right.
Um, so that is probably the biggest challenge we have about authentication. But again, we're small, and most of the students are here on campus. So it's pretty easy to verify that they are who they are. We don't really have a specific problem with that. I would imagine at larger institutions, it's probably could be problematic.
Right. Right. Exactly. Michael, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, as Charles suggested, it can be difficult to match faces to ID. Studies have been done, particularly in the alcohol and tobacco sales industries, to see whether like people are actually any good at this. And like we're good, but not perfect. And so there are quite a few media reports in my industry of proxy test takers. There was a great story out of Hong Kong well, not a great story, quite a disappointing story,
Yeah.
frankly.
Mm.
Some students were found out, and they had basically just found proxy test takers on the street who were lingering outside the test center,
Mm.
who kind of who were actively looking for clients and kind of looked like them, and they got in that way.
Right.
So that's the first breakdown point. That just humans are imperfect at this kind of checking. But I think a more important second breakdown point is that the test makers are not supplementing the staff expertise with the appropriate technology to reduce the problem of proxy test takers. And I'm thinking of things like biometric keystroke data. So we know, interestingly, that humans can be identified by their keystroke biometrics, the way they type, almost as well as they can be identified by their fingerprints. It sounds odd, but apparently it's true. And
Right.
so that's something that's already used in at-home testing. So if they can see that the same person is taking a test 5, 10, 100 times, they know, aha, here we have a proxy test taker. It's not something that appears to be implemented in test center testing as well as it could be. And so that's something that could be used to supplement the human expertise, but it's not. And even in a lot of tests I take, they're not fingerprinting or palm scanning, which is a very useful technology to help score users if they've gotten the feeling after the fact that the test taker did not actually take the test. So
Right.
there's real room to help to reduce this problem using technology, and I'm not sure it's being implemented as well as it could be.
Right. Good point. Good point. You know, check-in is the front door for the in-test centers, but there's a real threat that lives entirely behind the scenes, and it's the one that most institutions, organizations are at least comfortable discussing. You know, this is a threat most institutions don't like really talking about. How do you think about the inside risk without turning it into a trust problem with your own staff? And Michael, let me start with you on this.
This is a tough one for me to answer because, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have staff, I'm not part of a testing company, so it's hard. But in
Yeah.
my sector, the big English testing companies will have, I don't know, 15,000 test centers around the world.
Right.
Some of them are operated, in-house. Others are operated by big chains that do this sort of thing, and others are just operated by local entrepreneurs. So I recognize it can be a challenge to ensure that the staff across 15,000 test centers are all completely trustworthy. So, like, in this case, I think that the test makers just have a responsibility to do everything they can to eliminate the chance of dishonesty by the staff. And as I said before, a big part of that is digitizing the test. So you just almost
Right.
completely eliminate the possibility of item theft that way. So that's always my recommendation, is to move away from completely paper-based testing whenever possible.
Got it. Charles?
I would say here in-house here, I don't concern myself with that too much. It's basically me and another person that are handling these exams. Um, and I have full trust in the other person that works with me, and I trust myself to some degree. But the only concern I have is that if we do, because we do work with outside testing centers, and I
Right.
deliver the exam to them,
Right.
and that's always in the back of your mind, uh, that you don't know. But I would assume that um, this would come to light at some point. At least if someone were doing it in-house here, I would think within our small confines of our campus that somebody would tell 'em would bring this to light. Another student that someone said, "Hey, if you talk to so and so, you can get a copy of the exam," or something like that. I don't our students, there may be the dishonest students, but then there are those that will definitely blow the lid off something if they think that their grades being affected by, the test being compromised in any way. Um, now at your bigger testing centers, I can see where that would be a pretty big concern. I don't know what they do but as Michael said,
Yeah.
digitizing the exam definitely goes a long way, or keeping it, um, within the LNS or something like that, then you don't have to
Agreed.
worry about any copies floating around.
Agreed. Very good. Thank you. Insider risk is also the fastest path to a specific downstream problem, content actually leaving the building. Um, when content does leak out of center, Michael, how does that usually surface for you? And do you find out fast, or only when the damage is done? As a follow up question to that.
Well, in my industry, we only really hear about it after the damage is done. So there have been quite a few stories in the media over the last couple years about these sorts of leaks happening. As I said, often, sometimes they just happen because of leaks at the test center. Other times they're happening just because the same test is being delivered in different time zones at different times. So it's a very fast leak. But mostly we're hearing about it well after the fact. These tests are usually used for university admissions. So we hear about it after the students have enrolled, and then it becomes a bit of a media firestorm when the
Right.
admissions are revoked. Although I'm sure that there are cases when this is caught much more quickly, we just don't hear about them.
Right. Exactly. Charles.
I would say the only instance I've seen of this, I personally, is when we were using an online testing provider, and this particular testing provider, and we've since moved away from them, could only could only guarantee proctoring students within like a 5 hour window of time. That was as small of a window as I could arrange. Um,
Right.
and it became obvious, the instructor said that these students are, they've given the same answer. These three students have given the same answer on this exam,
Right.
and there's no way this is, organic, that they came up with these exact wording, um, and I'm not really sure how. I mean, obviously it was one student taking it first and then sharing the answers along the line with these other three students. Um, but that just basically came out in the pudding, that the instructor caught it and said that this isn't even possible. Um, and then the students had to take a retest or something like that. Uh, but again, I was still not aware of how they did it in the session, because I looked at their recordings of those sessions, and I was still not aware of when they did it, how they did it.
Right.
It was not obvious on the recording at all.
Got it. Every one of these threats, devices, proxies, insider leaks has mirror image in remote testing. So let's close by putting the two environments side by side. A lot of these threats have online counterparts, as you guys know. Device smuggling looks different remotely, so does a proxy candidate. Are in-center threats different from online ones, or just physical versions of the same problem? And Michael, I'm gonna start with you on this one.
They do really seem to be physical versions of the same thing. Um, but they are quite different. A proxy test taker in a test center is right there in the seat taking the computer, whereas a proxy test taker in an at-home test might be 1,000 miles away on a different continent. Um, the specific devices that could be used in a test center may be a little bit different than the devices used at home. But again, it is still the issue of smuggling in and detecting devices. So it's not that one method is inherently safer at all. I mean, that's not something I would ever say. It's just what makes a delivery method secure is the actual processes that are in place to secure it, the actual technology that's used to secure it, and then how willing the experts are to keep up with emerging threats. That's what determines whether a method is safer or weaker than another method.
Right, right. What do you think is easier to catch? A proxy candidate walking into a center, or one logging in from home? What would you think?
Um, I would, again, it all depends on the security that's in place to do it. If both methods are being secured using the best possible methods, it's probably the ability to detect would be equal, I would say.
Got it. And Charles, in-center threats fundamentally different from online ones?
I think anytime you have like degrees of separation, it becomes more of a threat. So with our little operation here,
Yeah.
I think we're definitely uh, probably the most secure we can be here. Um, but then as you pass the law exam along to a larger testing center, every time you lose a little bit of control over that, and including online testing providers. Um, you're not the person overseeing it. So it's kind of like having a realtor sell your house. You
Right.
know, is you don't really know what the realtor is telling that person. But there's certain assumptions you have to make that we're all above board here. So I think that, as I said before in the live classroom, I think in some cases when you're trying to proctor a large number of students, that can be more of a threat than say one person taking an exam online with an authentication process in place uh, and two camera sources, and they're sharing their screen if they happen to be working on a digital exam. Um, so I think it can be both. I- you know, uh, and in a larger testing center, I'm not involved with that directly. Like Michael had mentioned, these 200 students taking the language exam. That kind of volume is something we've never had to deal with here. So when I send something over, I send one exam for one student, typically at one testing center. And there might be multiple students, multiple testing centers, but
Right.
there aren't more than one student at that location. Um, so I think as long as there's one-on-one authentication and fairly good observations, then I think both can be equally as secure.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much. Let's really close on a prediction rather than a recap. If you had to bet on it, real money, what's the one in-center threat that's still underestimated across the industry right now, do you feel? And Michael, let me start with you on that.
I'd have to go with the proxy test takers. Like you said a moment ago, I think, um, it's not like getting a lot of attention. It's not really high tech. It's not exciting. There's not a lot of media coverage of it like we get
Right.
with smart glasses, but it still remains a major threat. And I think it's underestimated by a lot of people who probably should know better.
Mm, good point. Charles, what's your thought?
Um, I'd probably just go AI, and if they are able to smuggle a device in, that changes everything. Particularly if someone is being proctored in a one-on-one environment or something like that, and they're obviously not going to be able to use the device. And then having a big in-house testing center that misses something. Um, but to tell you the truth, the proxy, um, that is so far out of our experience. We just don't see that.
Right.
So I think Michael makes a good point, but it's just not in my realm of experience.
Got it. Got it. Well, we're out of time. Charles, Michael, thank you so much for joining and for collaborating with me today. That's the in-center thread file, devices, identity, insiders, and content. And a reminder that in person doesn't mean lower risk, just a different risk. So, again, thanks for joining. Enjoy the rest of the show. Take care.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.